Hey everyone, thank you for coming back to the stream. I'm excited to be presenting to you today. My name is Tom Hegel. I'm a principal threat researcher here with SentinelOne, specifically with the Sentinel Labs team. Today I'm really here to talk to you about the kind of the evolving threat landscape and what I kind of see as kind of like the road ahead. You know, from somebody that works in this side of the industry, tracking certain actors every day and trying to keep up with what they're doing and who they are, I think there's a much needed conversation around this topic in particular. So like I mentioned, I'm a part of the Sentinel Labs team, which is a part of SentinelOne. If you haven't heard of us, we're actually a pretty small but globally spread team that is really focused on nothing product related outside of being able to track the state-sponsored, the high-impact crime actors, and those that just need the most attention from the industry. And then we facilitate that back into the product and help our internal teams and our customers alike. But the big thing that we push is open community collaboration. So if you're not familiar with us, definitely check out our blog where we do all of our public threat research. It's sentinellabs.com, and you can kind of keep up with a lot of stuff I'll be talking about here. Again, we try to aim for anything that is public and community-focused, helping kind of spread the act for good on our research. So definitely open to your feedback if you have any on these topics. So what I want to talk about today is ultimately, again, a step away from the product and more towards the conversation of the evolving threat landscape. A lot has happened in the last 1+2 years that I think has shifted our perception about the threat landscape overall. That includes state-sponsored actors, the APTs out there, including the crime, financially focused organizations that we're running into every day. So, you know, I want to have a very blunt conversation, get right to like the raw details without any sort of anything holding back attribution details and so forth. So I wanted to be kind of open with you on that front. The landscape, like I mentioned, has evolved quite a lot. Within the last year, we've seen a dramatic shift in a lot of certain state-sponsored actors. You know, this slide gives you kind of an idea of the quantity that we see operating throughout different nations. And you know, while there's so much attention in certain regions of the world right now because of political situations or evolving geopolitical situations or just natural disasters, things like that get certain attention from actors, that's where we see a lot of them shift. But there's a continued global presence of a lot of this activity. So some of the things I want to talk to you today are about these topics in particular. I want to focus a bit on the low skill, but the highly persistent threat actors. Those are the financially focused folks that you're seeing in the news every day, either trying to hack a casino, trying to hack a third-party supplier, or going after supply chain intrusions, things like that. They're making huge impacts, all with the objective of financial focused, but they're taking it to a new level and introducing us to many new attack techniques that I feel like we're going to start to see the nation states and other crime actors begin to follow. They're kind of our emerging threat actors right now with new creative attack techniques. We'll talk a bit about supply chains. You know, obviously North Korea sticks out in this one, so I want to go through a couple of the intrusions that we found and reported on, and what our thoughts are on how that's kind of evolving, in addition to the hacktivism side. Hacktivism has been huge since the Ukraine war. It's even more so kind of getting a new cycle of energy through the Middle East conflict right now. And I think there's a big difference in terms of how they are unfolding and our thoughts on what we can expect in the future. And additionally, on top of all this, really want to show you from our perspective as threat analysts what we're tracking short-term priority versus long-term priority. This is a really important thing to think about that allows us to gauge where we should be placing our efforts because, you know, like all of you I'm sure listening in right now, there is not unlimited personnel resources to be able to do this work. So we have to be very strategic in where we place our efforts. And then obviously, with all this in mind, what the future kind of holds. So again, focusing a bit on the low skill, highly persistent threat actors. You know, these ones are the ones that come to mind with the major recent hacks. We see a lot of the casino hacking. We see a lot of BPO hacking. attempted supply chain intrusions, excuse me. And a lot of this is really originating around a sector of threat actors that we're kind of attributing to the bubble of the COM. You may be more familiar with their name under Octotempest or Scatter Spider, but a lot of this kind of comes from a self-described crime organization that is, young, typically Western focused, and has been highly successful in the way they're doing things. A lot of their techniques in the recent years have really focused on the extortion following intrusion into the network through legitimately stolen credentials. There's no 0 days, there's no emerging new malware families. It's stolen credentials, getting in and deploying remote software to kind of find things from there. So these actors in particular are kind of setting the pace for what we can expect from future crime actors, in addition to state-sponsored actors that are going to be a bit more politically focused. These ones are being extremely successful in blurring the lines between the physical and cyber domain. We're seeing these actors step into the arena of trying to physically harass security staff, physically force their way into getting network access, or harassing individuals to provide phishing credentials for payment and extortion and so forth. It's introducing a lot more risks and unknowns between business-to-business relationships. How can you trust a third-party BPO call center that your business hires to do security when they are the ones being used for the intrusion into your network in particular? So it's really kind of showing the world what's possible, and they're being highly successful. So I think we're going to start to see that a bit more. The Security Conversations podcast screenshot I have there, definitely recommend checking out this topic. One of the best researchers, I think, in our industry tracking this cluster of actors in particular is Allison Nixon. She's doing great work, and that conversation is well worth your time if you're interested in this topic. So focusing a bit on the supply chain intrusions, stepping away from the crimeware side, let's get into the nation-state side of the arena. So North Korea, there's been quite a few supply chain intrusions over the last year or two that have gained global media coverage. And the biggest one that really kind of kicked it off from our perspective was the 3CX intrusion. If you're not familiar with that, we called it smooth operator, and that was where North Korea had a supply chain intrusion and deployed malware through the C3X update to quite a lot of technology organizations globally. They are using these techniques to get into secondary organizations. Supply chains have become a very successful method for them to continue to get into secondary targets. And you can see that exactly with the jump cloud intrusion most recently as well. We were the first to attribute that to North Korea, but that was a similar focus where they compromise a technology organization to then supply chain a secondary organization. So it was almost like two supply chains in order to kind of get onto it. So the smooth operator story is kind of interesting. My team happened to be in Tel Aviv together when this all went down, and ended up working through 3 a.m. to research this actor as it was emerging, being able to get the details out to our partners and government contacts and try and get on top of it as fast as we can. Very interesting intrusion. Definitely check out our Smooth Operator blog. In addition to these two references here, the NCSC, and then Mandy did an amazing technical deep dive into one of their customers that they saw impacted by the Smooth Operator operation from North Korea as well. So talking a bit about the jump cloud intrusion, this one was a little bit different because it shows you the high tempo that North Korea is operating in to be able to conduct all these supply chain intrusions, and then how they actually overlap. So when we dove into this, jump cloud actually released indicators saying, hey, we had an intrusion. Here are the technical indicators for you to defend your network, and they had kind of left it at that. So what I did is I took those indicators and was able to identify how it links to North Korean APT, specifically the Lazarus cluster of actors, through overlap of infrastructure. You can see that we had medium confidence and high confidence that the North Korean APT was unique to the jump cloud IOC collection. And that actually linked us to an unreported or an unrelated, but just earlier reported intrusion that GitHub noted targeting other software that's uploaded to GitHub, modifications to that by a North Korean actor. And that ultimately leads to a bigger story of being able to map out a large collection of North Korean infrastructure that led us to continued discoveries today. That npmpool.org, that pivot there led us to additional attempted supply chain intrusions from North Korean actors that have never been public. But the summary of this really is that we're not seeing isolated cases of supply chain intrusion attempts. We're seeing repeated attempts, very little OPSEC in terms of overlapping infrastructure, because they've been highly successful in this and haven't seen many repercussions in terms of the pace at what they're doing. So it's a very interesting case, and I think we're going to begin to see more of it because of the success. Now, a lot of it with the smooth operator side and stepping into another North Korean actor, Blue Noroff, a lot of these are stepping into the arena of being multi-platform oriented, targeting Mac, Linux, Windows. It's a very interesting case because we're not seeing them focus on a particular subset of software or operating systems. They're kind of going for a spray and pray approach, trying to get whatever they can, ultimately with the focus of being financially focused. It's interesting because a lot of their cases have been so successful in being able to get into large corporations that could be used to further espionage needs or geopolitical events and so forth, but they ultimately have been financially focused to our benefit. However, once we feel once North Korea kind of adjusts techniques from there, they might be a bit more successful on the espionage side with these techniques in particular. One thing in particular that is kind of describing that would be what I'm actually reporting on more recently, talking about North Korea targeting and having an intrusion into the Russian defense industrial base. So this is organizations such as MPO MASH out of Russia that does missile engineering and design for the Russian government. It's a pretty interesting case because we got a pretty rare glimpse into North Korea targeting and having successful intrusion into Russia's defense organizations. And that gave us a new perspective on the overlap between Lazarus and Scarcraft, two publicly separate North Korean threat actors. And that was a really interesting case, seeing how they overlap and share resources, have different techniques to get into these organizations, and seeing how they operate internally. Definitely check out that s1.ai blog on that particular topic if you're interested. It's a lot more detail I can go in here, but it's a really unique case that we don't always get in our industry of showing the deeper side of the espionage side from North Korea. So talking a bit about hacktivism. Like I mentioned, there's been a huge shift in the hacktivism side since the Ukraine war kicked off. That was like the big shift from traditional hacktivism to like modern day. And then more so, we see a bit of an additional shift since the Middle East conflict kicked off about a month ago, I would say, at this point. So it's I would say we're in kind of like a new era of hacktivism. However, there's a couple things to kind of focus on here. So the first side, the politically focused semi-state hackers or attackers. There's two cases I want to talk about here. One's the no-name hacktivist group, Russia volunteer focused, pro-Russian agenda. We saw them kick off as being highly active within targeting Ukraine organizations, and then follow on, they're going after a lot of NATO organizations. That included telecom throughout the West and Europe as well. So that was interesting because we've been tracking them and continue to track them today, where they're updating their tooling, their denial of service toolkits, and trying to just make an impact to gain media coverage. And then we have this claimed Wagner group out of, they claim to be Wagner out of Russia. However, during the dispute between the Russian government and Wagner, we saw a pro-Ukrainian hacktivist collective claim to be Wagner to go and disrupt telecommunication organizations throughout Russia, targeting the GRU offices and so forth. So a very interesting case of kind of semi-state hackers where they're volunteer-focused, politically aligned, but may not be directly sponsored by the governments that they seek to support. So pretty interesting case. And the shift towards what we see in the Middle East today is a big difference, I think. So, just last week or 2 weeks ago at this rate, I reported on a lot of the hacktivist collectives we see operating out of, tied in pretty closely within the Israel-Hamas war. It's pretty interesting because we're seeing a big shift from these politically aligned individuals to state-sponsored hacktivist personas that are appearing to be volunteer-focused, but in reality are being supported by the government and trying to conceal attribution, conceal intent, and any sort of repercussions of their involvement in cyber attacks in the war. So it's pretty interesting. Some to name in particular are the Solomon group out of targeting Israel, doing a lot of hack and leak operations, making big claims in terms of their current denial of service attacks and what they are hacking. From our perspective, that has direct attribution back to the IRGC out of Iran. And there's a couple others that are kind of popping up as well in the same agenda. You'll see a similar theme between a lot of these where there's high production value, kind of hype videos showing their hacks, trying to gain a lot of media coverage. And that's the big difference today is we're seeing state-sponsored fake hacktivist personas make big claims and then reach out and try and have a PR campaign against media organizations to try and spread their sway public opinion about certain hacks or the conflict, make certain countries or certain organizations look more capable or weaker depending on their agenda. So that one's pretty interesting. We're seeing pro-Hamas, we're seeing pro-Hezbollah, the Houthis are going in there as well. So there's an interesting overlap, and this is going to be an emerging landscape that we're tracking very closely. So far, not major impact across the West. However, we feel like the pro-Iranian hackers are going to be challenging that very soon. So, kind of moving forward, I want to talk a bit from our perspective what we see as the long-term focus of threat intelligence, what we should be focusing on as threat researchers to identify to support our customers and the organizations we supply our intelligence to, versus the short-term priorities. Obviously, the big stuff emerging in the Middle East is taking our short-term attention, but long-term is almost a completely different story that I don't think a lot of people are soaking in to how much is needed at this point. So long-term, the number one threat that we're tracking is originating from Chinese attribution at this point. So the Chinese APT or the Chinese threat landscape remains our most observed threat actors globally at this point. Their quantity of operations is staggeringly high compared to everybody else. And the attack techniques and overall objectives of these organizations that are doing these attacks are evolving at a pace that is not as creative, but they're evolving at a well-resourced capacity. Meaning, they're walking in with fresh 0 days, they're scanning for fresh 0 days against organizations, and they're doing a lot of preparation for intrusions that they're going to need long-term. So one topic in particular of priority out of the Chinese threat landscape is obviously Taiwan. Going against Western organizations that may support Taiwan or provide aid in that region is a particular interest to us. And that is, I think, the long-term focus here. Within the next two to 3 years, perhaps, I think this will become a little bit more of a priority. So it's good to get ahead of it now as much as we can. But in reality, this is a threat act. There are threat actors out of there right now that are highly active, and there's not a lot of knowledge on them. So they're evolving at a pace that I think our industry is not keeping up with. But yeah, it's an interesting focus for right now. One in particular I want to highlight here is Volt Typhoon. There's been quite a few reports from U.S. governments and other private partners that are highlighting Volt Typhoon. They're the number one actor, in my opinion, that we should be tracking. Volt Typhoon is Chinese attributed. They have done a lot of big intrusions lately. You may remember them from their intrusion into Microsoft, where they did the O365 hack and so forth. That case was very interesting because they kind of opened our eyes to a new set of activity that I think, for the most part, we as an industry have been kind of missing or not paying enough attention to. So the Volt Typhoon in particular is a highly persistent threat actor, and their skills tend to be far superior to what we see out of the traditional Chinese APTs. Now, it's a very complex ecosystem when we look at Chinese state-sponsored actors. They're employing techniques that are challenging how we do both attribution and just detection in general. I would say, the most interesting technique as a threat researcher is the success they're gaining from targeting edge network devices, home routers, firewalls, switches, things like that, where they are able to get on and sit either for data mining, conducting further intrusions throughout a network, or preparation for further intrusions or impact if ever needed. That's an area of the cybersecurity industry where there's not a lot of defenses in place. Can you think of a couple of vendors in mind that are doing detection and response capabilities on hardware, firewall hardware? It's a tricky answer. As an EDR solution, we're pretty blind to that, to be honest with you. So it's a good place to focus our efforts right now because there's an increasing reliance from Chinese actors in particular on that technique, and we see that going to continue to spread to other actors. Outside of that technique in particular, when it comes to attribution and how we do clustering of threat actors, Chinese actors are increasingly challenging for us as researchers. I would like to say that we're able to attribute and cluster every Chinese actor in their own unique ways, but it's just simply not the reality nowadays. And a lot of that is because of the way that they're overlapping infrastructure. We see them coming from the same VPN solutions. We see them using the same proxy networks. And from the traditional way that we do threat actor clustering of infrastructure, malware, and attack techniques, it's becoming increasingly foggy and unreliable to be able to do it that way because there's so much deliberate sharing that muddies the picture of how we kind of separate certain actors. And a lot of this, the best way nowadays is to really understand how they're getting access to these proxy networks, how they're managing their infrastructure, and then long-term intrusion, post-intrusion actions on device. What are they going after? How are they operating? Hands-on keyboard activity is a big key to be able to differentiate between certain actors. But again, it's a very complex ecosystem. Some of our recent reporting on it tries to highlight the difference or the complexity of these actors. We're now seeing continued state-sponsored objectives from Chinese threat actors that we're also attributing to them doing for a financial focus from an individual operator side. So that not only further muddies our understanding of the Chinese threat actor, but it also makes it challenging for understanding their true intent of why they're getting into a certain organization. Is it ransomware for financial gain, or is it a long-term intrusion for geopolitical impact? So Chinese threat complex is pretty high at this point. So moving more towards the immediate term, like I mentioned, this is an interesting topic because Iran is a state-sponsoring entity that's supporting a lot of the hacktivist organizations that we're seeing, directly attributed to some of these hacktivist organizations we're seeing, like the SentinelOne group I mentioned previously. But then there's also the traditional APTs coming out of Iran. The typical charming kitten, APT 33, 34. Our bias towards how we understand Iranian actors, I think, is quickly being challenged because I think this conflict in the Middle East right now is shifting our perspective of what they're doing and how they operate as organizations, and then showing us how they are evolving today. Making use of hacktivist personas or restructuring organizations to combine resources is making our understanding of the actors, the clusters of these actors, a bit more challenging as well. But they are just this week evolving their toolkits, walking into organizations with fresh capabilities, new malware, new clusters of actors that we attribute to Iran that we've never seen before. So it's an immediate term focus for us, especially because of the urgency and the attention the Middle East conflict is rightfully gaining right now across the world. So, like I mentioned, we have the blog that we released talking about the certain hacktivist organizations or the certain Hamas, Hezbollah organizations related to the Middle East conflict. stay tuned for a blog we're going to release on the hacktivist side as well, talking a bit about how we look at all the hacktivist organizations and which ones we can confidently attribute to Iran right now. So that's something to be coming soon. So, with all that said, lots of doom and gloom. I don't want to discourage or, oversaturate the idea that these actors are highly capable, highly successful, and we have no hope. I just don't think that's true. I think the optimist in me likes to think about what we can do to understand what the future holds and prepare. What can we do as threat researchers or network defenders? If you're part of a small business, you play just as an important role as a defender at a critical infrastructure for your national security. So I think the coming years are going to give us some new perspective on the cyber domain. And there's a couple things I wanted to kind of highlight of what I think is going to be coming. Like I mentioned, the faked hacktivist personas, they're going to keep being deployed to attempt to sway public opinion. Like we're seeing in the Middle East right now, we're seeing direct state-sponsored threat actors using hacktivist personas to do media outreach. They're doing PR campaigns. They will hack and leak and then make big claims and then email PR firms around the world to try and get coverage. They want people to talk about them. So something to remember is as you write about them, as you research them or understand their public activity, are they telling you this on purpose, or do they want you to know this, or is this something that you're just finding out on your own? A lot of what we're seeing out of the hacktivist side is they want you to receive this message so you have a perspective of they are capable, they are doing things, when in reality it might not be the case. And then secondly, there's going to be an increased reliance on information operations. Similar to the previous topic, information ops are going to be huge in the upcoming presidential election for the U.S., we believe. And a lot of this is going to be based off of not direct disinformation, like obvious deep fakes or anything like that, but just sowing chaos on what is true. This is a sad reality now where we're going to see deliberate attempts at spreading misinformation, something that's not inherently incorrect, but just trying to muddy the understanding, cause confusion publicly to the point where nothing can be trusted. That is a goal in many cases. So I feel like this is going to become an increasingly important topic over the next year. The U.S. presidential election sticks out as an obvious topic for sure. And then lastly, the use of physical attacks to facilitate cyber attacks is going to become, unfortunately, more common. We're seeing it being used from certain crime actors right now with a certain level of success. Are they going to be paying somebody to throw a brick through your window to intimidate you, to give credentials, to gain network access, to not report something to your SOC? This is something that is currently being deployed by certain crime actors, and that is unfortunately going to become something that other actors are going to continue to monitor, see how successful it is. And if it does become successful, like any good versus evil campaign, they will shift to the techniques that are working. So there's an increased reliance on physical and cyber overlap, which is unfortunately going to become more concerning. So with that, thank you so much. Again, check out the sentinellabs.com blog if you're interested in any of these particular topics. Like I mentioned, we seek to focus on releasing this information publicly and openly so you can not only verify our analysis, but use it to build your own, build on top of what we have, ultimately to defend your organization. If you're ever, in particular, focused on any in particular topic, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Always happy to collaborate or talk specifics with you. And that's it for you. Thank you so much. I think we'll go ahead and move to some question and answers.
Yep, I've got a few questions here. So first one, how does AI contribute to the capabilities of low-skilled yet highly persistent threat actors?
Yeah, it's interesting. How does AI overlap is something that we're seeing kind of take hold just recently. Just actually 2 days ago, one of my colleagues on my team released a blog detailing a new malware toolkit that is actually using AI to do some cloud-focused intrusion attempts. So we're seeing the crime actors experiment with it right now. I wouldn't say that there is a extremely successful a use case of AI right now that the actors are using, outside of the things that stick out like phishing. Phishing is a big one. Being able to forge a phishing email or SMS that is AI generated to sound more realistic, to get rid of spelling mistakes. Foreign actors might be using that a bit more. But right now we're still kind of in this weird experimental phase from actors using AI.
Right, and then what indicators do you use to attribute attacks to threat actors?
Yeah, it ultimately depends on what exactly the threat actor is doing. Obviously, the network infrastructure is a big one. How we see the C2 domains operating, the IP addresses that are tied into this certain campaign. That's a big piece. But that's kind of like the traditional way of doing clustering, and it does introduce mistakes because threat actors share resources. So the best technical details ultimately lead to like post-compromise actions. What malware are they deploying post-compromise? What are their hands-on keyboard actions doing? What commands are we seeing them do? Things like that typically identify actors more accurately for attribution. And then there's always the operational security mistakes that occur during compromise, but also in how they're building their campaigns. If I'm able to look at a C2 domain by one threat actor and identify 50 other C2 domains, that may introduce me to a mechanism that they're building their infrastructure that leads me to a secondary actor to do confident attribution or identify additional intelligence to understand them a bit more. So kind of not a one easy answer to that. It's kind of a little bit of everything.
All right, and then one more. So what are the differences you're observing between the Ukraine war and the latest activity in the Middle East?
Yeah, that was the big thing, was the hacktivist side. When the Ukraine war kicked off, oddly enough, my team was together we're a globally spread team, so that one was weird because we were all happened to be together at a company organization, and we spent a good 2 days in a hotel room eating Chinese food when the war in Ukraine kicked off. And that started initially from the onset of a big blast of wipers hitting all of our customers and organizations in Ukraine. So that set off our bells. Custom malware being deployed for immediate disruption following an onset of physical activity in the region. So that was, it was shocking, and it really kind of opened my eyes to the overlap between the cyber and physical domain. And I feel like that was kind of like the first cyber warfare, in my opinion. But in the Middle East, that was just not the case. What we saw was the initial attack by Hamas, and then the war kicked off at that point. Outside of a few interesting things like red alert apps for attack alerts for citizens of Israel that were being phished and faked and disrupted, there wasn't like a big malware toolkit that really kind of kicked off in the region. There wasn't a huge onset of wipers. Instead, what we see is the flood of disinformation and the flood of hacktivist personas trying to do denial of service attacks. Successful or not is debatable at this point, and we'll learn more as the future holds. But it was almost like custom malware, state-sponsored actors versus everyone's angry. There's tons of chaos happening on the information side. So it's two stark differences, but I think it gives us an interesting perspective, academically, on cyber warfare in two different scenarios.
All right, thanks. That's all the questions I had.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.